Picture. Put your hands together for Marcus.
I thank you all for having me come out. I really appreciate it. I just published a book. This is it right here, California's Next Century 2.0. It is a plan on what California can become in the next century. And it can happen within a few years, and it will dramatically change every aspect of the quality of life as you know it here for Californians. I published this book. There's an article at LA Daily News that just came out by Tom Elias that did a good book review. 20 California State University professors are looking at this, including Michael Dukakis. I've been endorsed by foreign policy scholars, and I've spoken at 30 California cities where people reacted enthusiastically about the message I'm going to give to you now. So, in the table in front of you, there's a flyer that talks about where this is going and why we need your support. I'm passing around a sign-in sheet too. If you're interested at all, if you give me your email, I will keep you informed. Okay, so first thing that I need you to do is picture the happy California cow. You know, the one that's happy California cow, so happy it's here from Wisconsin or whatever. It's a big fat cow, very full of life, sun, green grass, and everything. Okay, you have that in your head?
Yep.
Picture the exact opposite. A cow that is as sick and as emaciated and as close to death as you've ever seen one. Something maybe Central Africa, Southwest America, something like that. The ribs are showing, the bones on the neck is showing, there's barely any skin, the skin droops off the bones because it's so malnourished, it's just barely holding on. It's what I call milked to death. Everybody have that image?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, here's why that's important. It's you. It's all of you together, it's this entire state. You are not the happy cow. You are the sick, near-death cow, and you've been that way for 30 years. You just didn't know it. That's what I'm going to point out. So, every social problem that you've seen or heard of in the last 30 years has either been caused by the fact that you are this sickly cow, or could be fixed if you were actually the healthy cow. So, what the book is about recognizing that we are in the state and what we can do to get out of the state. So first, how would you make California healthy again? What does it mean to move from a sickly cow state to a healthy, happy California cow state? This is the plan in the book, and this is what it's offering. Number one, half of your taxes would be removed. Number two, half of the bureaucracy of every business in California would be cut. Number three, there would be no cuts to service at all. Number four, there would be a restoration of police, teachers, firefighters, and additional services that have been cut in the last 2 years. So what I'm talking about is 50% of your taxes removed, half the bureaucracy of every business gone, and additionally, services not cut, but restored. Yes, that's a tall order, and it can't happen with the California economy and the government as it's set up now. But with a shift where you're not tweaking the existing system, you've replaced it with an entirely different one, as proposed in this book, then all of these things can happen. You can have the best schools in the world. You can have the best infrastructure in the world. You can have less taxes, more services. You can have inspiration and goals for your children moving into the future. How many of you remember what was called the Golden State era of California? Pat Brown was governor. Picture that period. California universities were the envy of the world. They were cheap. You could get a good education for barely any money. Public schools were the envy of the world. We had the best roads, dams, seaports, airports, levees, everything. Best in the world. We were the envy, the greatest ideas came here, the innovation came here, the innovation for jobs came here. Picture that era, today, now, again. That's what I'm talking about. You can go from where you are now, where you have the worst ghettos in the world. You have the worst roads, schools, dams, airports, levees, seaports, according to the federal government in all of America. Infrastructure literally crumbles and falls on people. You can move from that to what you remembered as the Golden State era, and you can do it now, and you can do it within 5 years. That's what I promise you. So, how does that happen? How can you make that incredible shift? This is where the sick cow image comes in. So, I'm going to give some stats and figures, and what I'd like you to do is when you hear something you haven't heard of before, instead of going, huh, I didn't know that. How long has this been going on? Why didn't I know that? Don't say anything. Just picture that image of that sickly cow. Because what's going to happen is you're going to find out a bunch of stuff you didn't know. And this cow image is going to constantly be going off. And hopefully you'll get the idea of how serious an issue this is and has been for the last 30 years. So, here's how you can have the Golden State era here today and why you are currently the sickly cow. Number one, you make enough money to be one of the richest countries in the world. It's robbed from you, taken away, and pays for other people to have life better than you. And this has gone on for 30 years. That's the big secret. Every year, you lose about 80 to 120 billion. 80 to 120 billion dollars in extra federal income taxes that you absolutely receive nothing for. You pay federal income taxes. By the way, everybody's federal income tax is usually more than their state income tax. Would people generally agree with that? Okay, so you pay federal income tax. It pays for military, Social Security, etc. After all that's paid for, there's $120 billion left over. You never see that money. It goes in grants by the federal government to pay for roads, schools, dams, bridges, airports, seaports, levees, and government buildings in 35 other states who already have roads, bridges, dams, schools, seaports, airports, levees better than you. The federal government does a review of the infrastructure of all 50 states. Type in California, roads, worst. You will see multiple federal reports talking about how California has the worst roads in the entire country. Change it to California, schools, type in worst. Change it to California, bridges, levees, airports, seaports, dams. Every single piece of infrastructure is rated by the federal government as worst in all of America. Yet, for 30 years, you pay $120 billion to make sure that 35 other states who already have all of this infrastructure better than you, make sure that they stay better than you. It's gone on for 30 years, well documented. And so that everybody knows, don't believe a word I say. Book's 500 pages long, there's about 200 citations in there, and I've already got a commendation from San Francisco Book Review. They said the plan was radical, but well documented. Everything's in here. Don't take my word for it. Check it out. Also, if you type Marcus Ruiz Evans in, California's Next Century 2.0, you will literally see pages of reviews on the internet covering everything. So, besides the fact that you pay $120 billion in extra federal income tax for 30 years and receive absolutely nothing for it, what you also need to know is that $120 billion is roughly what it takes to run the entire state of California. So you waste your state income tax money equivalently in the amount of federal income tax money you throw away, and you've done this for 3 decades. 30 years. You do that. No one's complaining, no one's gone on. If you had that money, your state budget could be 200% of what it is instantaneously. It's been this way for 30 years. This is not new, this has been going on. So guess what's going to happen in another 30 years? Someone else is going to be here, talking to your kids or your grandkids, going, oh, I didn't know, how did this go on? Why didn't somebody do something about this? But it gets worse. So, you have 120 robbed, and then you pay the rest of your federal income tax. For the services you do pay, you don't actually get them. So, border security. Does everyone think that there is no issues with the California-Mexico border, and everything's fine and it works great? I'm going to take that as a no. We've had border security issues for a long time. So you pay federal income taxes to handle this because every nation in the world is supposed to take care of their borders. That is the first responsibility of every national government. They don't do that. Then the state monies dipped into a second time to provide additional personnel so that you get the number of bodies on the border to protect it that you need. So you pay federal income taxes for border security. Doesn't happen. They dip into the state income taxes. That's 200% tax. But it gets worse. National security. How many of you are aware that you never got your 9/11 security money to prevent you from being blown up by a nuclear radiation attack for 5 years after 9/11? Was anybody aware of that? No. You've lost half a decade's time after 9/11 when the Director of Homeland Security, when he retired, Michael Chertoff, said that California was the most vulnerable to attack terrorist spot in all of America. And yet for 5 years, half a decade, you got nothing. Do you know who actually protected you from terrorist attack? You. There was an extra $20 to $30 tax on every container coming out of the seaports of Oakland and LA that the truckers had to pay, which means that the goods in California for the local market went up, which means you paid more money so that you can actually have nuclear radiation detectors at the seaports to make sure you weren't blown up. So that's another one. You pay national income tax, you're supposed to get national security, you don't. Then you pay additional tax, that's 200% tax, but it gets worse. Everybody remember every year we have fire season, right? Forest fires go up. Your government doesn't even bother asking the federal government for assistance whenever there's a national emergency. It's called a national emergency because the destruction is so high, the national government's supposed to be involved. That never happens. What your government does is they go to other states, pay them additional state income tax money to borrow helicopters so that we have the amount of firefighting capability that we need every single fire season. So that is an additional 200% tax on 3 different services that every national government in the planet provides. They're not yours. But it gets worse. Did you know that California does its own environmental regulation, insurance regulation, healthcare regulation for the new Medical Care Act, and now we're getting into retirement planning? Those are traditional federal reserves. You pay for them, but California administers those things as if they were the federal government already. The federal government has basically given up power on these things just to California. But you still pay for the feds to do that service, even though your state government provides that service. So, just to recap, you are losing $120 billion off the top. You are not getting border security, not getting national security, not getting disaster assistance. You're paying double for environmental insurance, health, and retirement. But it gets even worse. Because when you need assistance, this economy is in dire straits, we needed a bailout. Does everybody remember when Schwarzenegger attempted to ask for a bailout for California about 2 years ago? We got ridiculed in all of the newspapers across America. Californians are spin happy, they're crazy liberals, they have no fiscal discipline, they deserve the collapse of their economy, they put themselves in this situation, all their fault. We got no bailout and you got ridicule instead. Now here's the thing, we were asking for $20 billion for 1 year. You've paid about $80 billion for 30 years. If you look at that like unemployment insurance, you deserve that tiny fraction of money you've paid into. But you got nothing. Instead, you get ridiculed, and you get said that it's your fault. Never mind that you continue to pay this welfare statement the same year you asked for help. But it gets even worse. Imagine you pay insurance, and you can never cash that policy out. So, it has been revealed recently that even if America wanted to federally bail out California's economy during a recession, they can't. The California economy is simply too large for the Bank of America to bail out. So you're paying for an insurance policy that you can never cash in on, ever. Obama was the first one we went to during the recession asked for a bailout. Also went to Clinton. He said no. We asked for help with Bush Sr., got nothing. Asked for help with Bush Jr., got nothing. Clinton, nothing. Bush, nothing. Obama, nothing. Bush Jr., nothing. 30 years. It's a pattern. But it gets worse. Because the fact is that we've been in this recession 5 years. Did you know that there was a plan to create 150,000 new jobs here in California, and it has been sitting on the dockets in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years? Multiple presidents say they are concerned about this recession. California is the worst hit economy in all of America and the worst recession in a century. Governor Schwarzenegger went to Asia, signed trade deals, worked out the contracts, worked out all the agreements, handed them right on the desk of Washington, D.C. George W. Bush sat on them for 5 years, Barack Obama sat on them for 5 years. Both presidents are totally different, and yet they sat on trade deals which would have created thousands upon thousands of new jobs for Californians in the middle of a recession, and we got nothing. By the way, trade deal's still sitting there. So, if you count the obstruction to our economy being able to move forward in a way that it's ready, well, that's another $100 billion. So, you're robbed about $120 billion, you pay an extra couple billion, you get nothing for it, and then when you try to make more money, that's blocked too. 30 years. So, how do you stop that? Well, that's the plan of the book. And what it says is that the world is changing. And the world needs a new diplomatic negotiation center for international negotiations. Switzerland had done this in the last 200 years, but Switzerland has said in the last 2 years that they can no longer be the negotiation center for international corporations and national countries like they've been in the last 200 years. Now, people think that Switzerland's economy is based upon banking. That is a fraction of their economy. The majority of the economy is based upon diplomatic services. This is important because what's key is that Switzerland has never had a recession in 100 years. They have the lowest unemployment rate in the entire world today. They basically have no ghettos, no poverty, no problems with their school system. Everybody's rich, everybody has money. They've had the highest living standard in the last 200 years, and they've been the wealthiest country in the world the last 100 years. If we take over the role that Switzerland had, we can move from into a return to the Golden State era to beyond it by orders of magnitude. And what I mean is that you get California to the point where there are no more bad schools, there are no more bad roads and infrastructure, there are no really bad places. Yes, there's some poverty, but ghettos are gone. Poor infrastructure is gone. The idea of homelessness is gone. The idea of I don't know if I'm going to have a job next year is gone. All of that is possible with the shift as proposed in the book. That's the plan, California's Next Century 2.0. We are working on having an initiative. There's a nonprofit group that's going to be started soon, and we're going to try to put an initiative on the ballot in 2014 or 2016 to direct the California state government to look into this plan to get California out of this recession and effectively make us recession-proof for the next century. I know that's a tall order, but I want to remind you, foreign policy scholars have endorsed this. 4 different think tanks are looking at this. 20 professors, 30 California cities, and the LA Daily News has endorsed this. It's radical, but it's possible. And when you go home and you think about, when is the recession going to be over? What am I going to tell my kid about next year? Oh yeah, work hard because there's going to be a job for you? Nobody knows that. Nobody knows if the economy's getting better. Nobody knows if America's going to come back to where it was, or if it's in a new plateau and it's going to stay low. There are some economists saying this recession is going to go on 20 years. So, here's the offer. Wait and see. And by the way, nobody has any idea when it's over or how to get out. Or take destiny into your own hands. Start having the conversation about how California's milked almost to death, and how if we solve that problem, we wouldn't have a recession, and we wouldn't have any of the social problems that you go outside and you see every day. Wait and see if the recession gets worse, or stagnates, and there's no hope for your children, or pursue a plan that's radical but offers a real chance to put you on a new plateau you've never even dreamed of before. I'll stop and turn it over to questions. Thank you. Yes, please.
A great deal of what you're talking about has to do with the fact that California cannot control its own federal taxes.
Yes.
And it has to deal with all of the people in the Senate and in the Congress who want the money to go to their states.
Yes.
Is there something in your book that offers some way to alleviate that? And
Yes.
how the heck would you do that?
Thank you. Good question. So, Scotland, in the last 5 years, is the key to the whole situation. Scotland has been a colony of England, where everything was decided by British people in London. Yeah, they had a few representatives, but whatever happened in Scotland was decided in London for 400 years. Remember Braveheart, the movie? That goes back. In the last 5 years, Scotland has moved to almost completely independent, with the exception of the military and the dollar and all existing business contracts. So Scottish boys and girls still serve in the British military, they still use the British pound, and all business contracts between Scotland and England have been retained. But they moved into what they called subnational sovereignty. They did it in the last 5 years, they did it through a series of votes, it was completely peaceful, and the economies of England and Scotland have actually grown closer together, although they legally pulled apart, and the intermarriage rate between Scottish people and English people, i.e. marrying, has actually gone up. So while it seems radical, it works well. By the way, this form of government, subnational sovereignty, exists in 25 nations around the planet, in all cultures and regions today. And if you go back to the previous century, there was another 25. So it is rare, but it is a universally applicable form of government found in all cultures. We would look into that system and see if that's possible for us. And I want to point out that, again, the Scottish and English economy has risen with this, and the Queen of England just gave Scotland a commendation for Scottish soldiers' valor in Afghanistan, and that's post-subnational sovereignty. We look at that plan and why it works for 25 other nations, and could it work here? That's what the initiative is going to do. Yes, please.
Does this require changes to the federal constitution to enable this, or?
No. We would follow, what Scotland did was they had votes, so certain powers would come back to the state. If people vote that the next year, you get even more. And eventually you move to where most of the powers have returned back. This would capitalize on something the federal government has already on their own decided to do to California. The feds decided they didn't want to run environmental policies for California, so they gave back the power. They decided the same thing with insurance, they decided the same thing with healthcare policy, they decided the same thing with retirement. So they are already saying, California, you are too complicated and too busy and too unlike 49 other states. You effectively take this federal power and just run on it on your own. We would continue a policy that's already going on. By the way, are you aware that the Supreme Court has already asked Congress to approve a separate California Supreme Court region because the California Ninth Circuit is already overloading the entire national Supreme Court docket? Federal government's already doing this. They're already moving in this way. We have multiple powers that no other state has because we're too difficult to run. So we will continue that trend. Yes, please.
Well, now, California has the right to regulate some of these things, but it doesn't escape federal regulation on those accounts. There's still interstate commerce issues that apply to California when you're talking about insurance, environmental regulation, and so on. That does seem like, that seems like a constitutional problem that would be very difficult to extract California from. If California wanted to say that CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, was the only regulation, but and sort of back out of the National Environmental Protection Act scheme, we're not going to be. We may be able to do that within California, but there's so many interstate issues involved that it would be almost impossible to do. Likewise with insurance of all kinds. How does that work?
I'm going to try to answer what I think. So, with insurance, environmental, healthcare, and retirement, we call the shots. The feds have effectively given us overpower. Now, they may say, hey, California, we don't like the way that you're doing it. We want you to do X and Y. They would have to switch the system over and retake over control. And what I'm saying is that in certain areas, they've given over complete power. We have complete jurisdiction. We act effectively as a federal agent. Don't believe me, it's documented. And additionally, we would continue to follow this trend that they themselves have put upon us. But business deals between California and other states, the states act as they are now. That's what Scotland did. So for business contracts, absolutely nothing would change. As far as California policy and its interaction with federal policy, we would continue the trend that's already been started. The constitutional issue that you are talking about has already been outflanked by the federal government. They should have not given us back control over the environmental regulation, insurance, retirement, and healthcare, but they did. And they've done it for over 10 years. A legal precedent has been set. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, but Brown was governor.
You don't want to be filmed receiving the certificate.